character is. If we're saying that we're Christians, we come to church, what ought we be doing in our personal lives to cultivate character, to cultivate deep character? And we've looked at traits like patience and honesty and generosity and compassion. And we're going through this. The last verse of 1 Corinthians 13, remember, I'm saying that we're using this sort of as a guide, because it's saying, 1 Corinthians 13 is saying that love, true love, Christian love, does these things. True Christian love is this type of character. It's basically, think about 1 Corinthians 13 as sort of a resume, a character resume. It's patient, it's kind, it's honest, it's not boasting, it's humble. And this last part of 1 Corinthians 13 says that love always protects. And it repeats this word always and always and always. It always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Now, this word in the Greek is one of my favorite Greek. I can't believe I'm saying, I sound like such a nerd. I have a favorite Greek word. Wow. Okay, but I do. This is one of them. That just sounds like a real nerd. This word is pantos, and it's or pas, but in this form it's pantos. And what it means is, yes, we translate it to always in English, and it does mean always, but it means so much more than that. A lot deeper of a meaning than just always. See, pantos in the Bible means basically a wholeness. It means entirety. It means completeness. It means constant, consistent, unwavering. You might call it faithful. We're just saying God is faithful. This word always hints at that meaning, to say that love is always these things. It is unwavering. It's sort of like making a wedding vow. It's a promise that you make that if you're married, you know this. If you're not married, you will soon find this out when you get married, that you promise to love the person even when you don't particularly like the person. That's what this is. This always, this pantos is an always. It's an unmoving, it's an unshakable belief in something that you proclaim. And today I'm using the word I'm using to sum this all up. The character trait that I want us to look at, I'm calling integrity. And if you were to look in the dictionary for the word integrity, the first definition you're probably going to come across is a sense of moral uprightness. If you say that person has a lot of integrity, most likely you mean they're morally upright. They're a good, solid person. But just like this word pantos means so much more than that, I believe that the biblical integrity means so much more than that as well. C.S. Lewis says that integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching. And what he's basically saying is it's being consistent. Having integrity. Think about, why do you and I break promises with our friends? It's because we're not consistent with them in relationships. But integrity, at least biblical integrity, and I think what this parable shows us, and what we actually see through Jesus, is what true integrity looks like. And it's this. It's being true to God even when he feels completely absent and gone. See, the master in this story is gone for a long while, and we'll see what that does to his different servants, how it makes them feel. But in our relationships, if we know God or if we feel like we don't know God, if you've been a Christian for many, many years or not at all, you probably have had at least one or two moments in your life, at least, where you feel that God is completely absent, completely gone, nowhere to be found. And it's at this time that Christian integrity has to come in and say, I will not waver, even in the midst of suffering, in the face of an absent master. And of course, as I was putting this sermon together, I thought, I'm a preacher, now I'm a pastor. I don't have these types of moments. I always think God is there, right? I'm a rock of faith. I'm not joking. I did think this until midweek when my wife reminded me, oh so nicely, of a time not too far off ago when I did feel this way, that God was absent. And many of you know that sort of my backstory. My wife and I lived in China, and she was telling me this story, reminding me of it. I had even forgot about this. I had so built up in my head that I was such a man of faith and so secure in my faith. And she said, don't you remember that one time? And she reminded me of a time in China. See, we were living in China a few years ago, and I worked a job at night, so I'd always be coming home late, very, very, very tired. Now, this happened one night that I was walking home from work, extremely tired and extremely bitter, because, and many of you know this, when my wife and I lived in China, we were actually just recovering from losing our first daughter at 22 weeks of pregnancy. So we had lost our daughter in America, we had moved to China, and we were dealing with the grief of losing the baby to death. And we were also dealing with the trouble of getting pregnant again and having another baby. It was been at least over a year or so of trying and failing, and just nothing was seemed right. And we're in China, we're not as happy with each other, and we're not happy in our relationship so much, and definitely spiritually weak. And of course, I'm supposed to be the seminarian, the guy who has all the theological answers as to why this is happening. Why? And my wife would say, why is God so far away? Where is he? Why is he not answering our prayers? Not only did he take our daughter, but he won't even give us another baby. What's wrong with him? And of course, I was the guy who said, oh, honey, have faith. Have faith. Don't waver. Don't fold. Have faith. But I remember coming home one night, and I almost lost it. I remember walking across, there's a little footbridge that connected our little home island where we lived to the rest of the city, and I was walking across the footbridge, looking at this river that ran through the city, and I remember distinctly saying, look, I said this out loud, actually. I stopped, and people must have thought I was crazy. I'm talking to myself out loud, and I said, God, listen, I've done it your way, and you're not anywhere near me right now. And I literally said, God, because you're not near me, I don't want to be near you. I said the words, I want to disown you. I'm being honest to say this. This is what I said to him. Now, that was a moment when God felt completely and utterly absent from my life, from our life. And that was a moment in which I did not have Christian integrity. That was a moment in which I did waver. Now, you go to God honestly to complain, that's fine, but that's not what I felt. I wasn't just complaining to God. I was actually telling him, I want none of you, because you are nowhere to be found. Your results are not my results. Your answers, I don't even hear them. And so this week, my wife reminded me of that story, and what it reminds me of is that in all of our walks with God, no matter how long you've walked with him, no matter how much time you've spent as a Christian, you inevitably come across a time where you look at God and say, you are absent. And it means, integrity does, what do you do in that moment? Like in a marriage, when you don't exactly like your spouse, are you still going to love them and be faithful to them and have integrity, or we might in marriage call it fidelity? And the same question comes to us today in this parable, because this parable tells us about integrity, and it does, or it tells us about the lack of integrity, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Because here, the traditional understanding, if you've heard this parable preached, in the context of which it's preached, here's what's happening. Jesus is about to go in Jerusalem, and this is appropriate that we are studying this parable today, because next week, of course, is Palm Sunday, and this was right before Jesus went in for Palm Sunday into Jerusalem. And he's about to go in there, and all the people around him, his disciples, and even the Pharisees, thought, okay, something's about to happen. Something's got to happen right now. They thought he's going to come into Jerusalem, he's going to take over his kingdom, and of course Jesus knows the long-term picture. He knows that's not going to happen. Actually, he's going to go away for a long time. And he gives these people this parable to say, listen, when I am away from you, what will you do? Will you cower in fear when suffering comes along and I'm not to be found? Or will you be bold in your faith when I am so far away that you can't even see me or hear me or feel me? He's saying that he uses the story of the nobleman, and of course that represents Jesus, and these servants represent you and I. And he says here, I'm going to give you my gospel. I'm going to give you the truth. Now, I'm going to go away. And there are going to be times in your life that you feel, I am nowhere to be found. What will you do in those times? And here, but in the servants, the lives of the servants, we see integrity, we see fidelity, we see faithfulness by what they do and what they don't do. So I want to look at two things. One, the lack of integrity of the servants. And then secondly, the source of our integrity as Christians. First, the lack of integrity, and then the source. Where do we get integrity? Let's be honest. Again, tomorrow's Monday. How are you going to stop breaking promises with your friends? How are you going to stop breaking promises with people, with your spouse, with God himself? How are you going to be a person of deep integrity that's unmovable and unshakable? This parable tells us this, and it points to the source. But look first at the lack of it. What happens here? The steward, the servant, the master comes back, and what did he do with his money? It wasn't that he did anything particularly wrong with it, right? He didn't go out and spend it lavishly or abuse the money. But what did he do? He didn't do anything with it. See, what happened is the master goes away. And let me put it in context here. The mina or mina, however you pronounce it, I may be messing it up, is worth 3 months of salary. Okay, 3 months of your salary. So effectively, this is what the master did. The master said, I'm going to give, and imagine your boss saying this to you, I'm going to give you 3 months of your salary today. Then I'm going to go away. You have no idea when I'm coming back. You have no idea where the next paycheck's coming from. You have 3 months' salary. Go and do something with it. Now, if you're a normal, rational human being, hopefully that would frighten you a little bit. Okay? You have 3 months' salary to live on. What are you going to do with it? You have no idea when more money's coming. You have no idea if more money's coming. At some point your master will return, but you don't know when. See, the servant, who kept his money, did what you and I would do, what you and I do in our relationship with God. When he feels absence, we cower in fear. We make promises, but then when God is far, far away, we break those promises because we think of him as an absentee landlord. What happened to the servant was he was afraid. He was afraid. And in his fear, when pressure came down on him, when a form of suffering or fear came down on him, what did he do? Instead of being bold in his faith, he showed that he had no integrity. He had no fidelity to the master. Remember, he says, I did this really, I'm paraphrasing, I did this because I was really afraid of you. And he tries to blame the master, and the master says, oh, no. If you were really afraid of me, then at least you would have put the money in the bank. See, he says to the servant, really, you're not afraid of me, you're afraid of my absence. You're afraid of when I'm gone and you don't feel me in your life. That's when you cower. That's when we lose integrity. But it goes even deeper than this. The lack of, when we lose integrity as human beings, when we break promises with one another, what we're really doing is we're breaking ourselves. Lewis Smedes, a theologian, writer, and a professor, he was talking about marriage, but the metaphor works as well for your relationship with God and having integrity. And he was talking about having integrity in marriage. And a quote is in your bulletin. He says that, my wife has lived with at least 5 different men since we were married. And each of the 5 has been me. The connecting link with my old self has always been the memory of the name I took on back there. I am he who will be there with you. When we slough off that name, lose that identity, we can hardly find ourselves again. And the bonds that connect us to others will be frayed to breaking. When we break promises to others, we lose integrity and ourselves. See, this is why at the end of the story, the master takes, and I didn't read the part, but he takes away the money from the steward, or from the servant, and he says, don't you realize that when I'm far away and you lose your faith in me, you've lost everything about yourself. Just as in a marriage, what you're saying is, you may change and I may change, but the one connecting link will be the promise I made at the very, very beginning of it all. And the same way in our Christian lives, the one thing we can hold on to in the midst of suffering, in the midst of God's absence, when his face seems so far away, the only thing you and I are going to hold on to is that one promise we made, the connecting link. Now, hopefully, I've sold you a little bit on the idea, on wanting to be a person of integrity. Wanting that when God doesn't feel like he's there for you, when people actually don't feel like they're there for you, you still say, you know what? I'm going to hold on to you because of the promise and commitment that I made before, not the present circumstances we're experiencing now. That's impossible to do. If you try to do that, if you say, well, you know what, I'm going to be a better friend. I'm going to keep my promises from now on. I'm going to have faith when God gives me suffering. I'm going to believe even when God seems so far away. Good luck with that. It won't work. You'll try. I know we will all try and we will all fail. And this is why. It's because you and I, in order to be people of integrity, have to begin to see true integrity. We have to begin to look to someone else, to something else, that is integrity, that is faithfulness. And we can't see integrity as a model. We have to see it as a motivation. And what I mean by that is we can't see it as an abstract inspiration, but you have to see integrity if it's going to be real for us. If it's going to be a real character, we have to see it as a personal reality. What do I mean by that? Almost everybody in here, I'm assuming, I keep doing these movie things, and I'm assuming everybody sees these movies. So if you haven't, I'm sorry. Braveheart. I know you guys have all seen it. Nod if you have, please. Give me something here. Some reaction. Okay, I got a little bit. Braveheart. Now, you know this movie. William Wallace. He's fighting for the freedom of Scotland. Mel Gibson's character. And I won't recap the whole plot. At the end of the movie, though, what happens? He's betrayed. And he goes in front of the tribunal. They have lies about him in England. They accuse him of being a traitor. And he remains faithful, right? He remains true to his cause. Remember, he started fighting to defend his murdered wife, and then he starts fighting for his people. But at the end of the movie, they give him every chance to recant. They say, recant what you believe. Join us. Just recant it. Say it never was true. And he says, no, I'm going to be faithful. I'm going to be true. He's even so faithful. He has such integrity that when the queen, who loves him, comes to him to get, remember, she gives him the not poison, whatever, medicine to help endure the suffering that he's going to go through, the torture that he's about to go through. She gives this to him, and he spits it out. Basically what he's saying is, I'm going to be so true. I'm going to be so faithful to my people that I'm going to be willing to go through this excruciating pain. And if you remember the end of the movie, it's a little difficult for me to even watch. Of course, he's racked up and he's stretched and he's pulled and his organs are ripped out and he's suffering and he's not saying a word and he's being faithful and true and a person of integrity, and that's all well and good. And then, of course, the crowd at the end of the movie starts to see this suffering and they're moved by it. This enormous suffering, and in the face of it, Mel Gibson's character, William Wallace, shouts out freedom. Remember, he's so faithful and so true. Now, that's a good story. That's a good model. But I don't know about you, but when I get through suffering, I don't think about William Wallace. Why? Because he didn't do that for me. He did it for his Scottish people. I got it. It's a good model. But does that make you and I want to go to the rack? Does that make you and I want to be stretched and disemboweled and cut up? Basically this, does William Wallace help you get through suffering? No. Why? Because he didn't do it for you. It's not a personal reality. It's an abstract inspiration. But you and I, because we're on the other side of Easter, which we'll celebrate in a couple weeks, you and I have a personal reality. And it comes in the person of Jesus. When he's on Mount Olives, you remember that he's praying, and this comes in Luke later on. And he's praying in deep anguish, and he says that he has like tears of blood. Do you know what's happening there? God is starting to show him the cup of wrath. He's basically starting to get a little glimmer of the excruciating pain that he's going to go to on the cross. He's starting to get it. I mean, he knew it before in some way, but now he's starting to get the taste of it, and he's in deep, deep anguish, pain. He realizes what's about to happen to him. And you know that every time Jesus prayed before this, he got heaven. And this time when he prayed, he got hell. Jesus was praying, and you know what his disciples were doing? They were sleeping. They were sleeping, and he has the chance to look at them. Now keep in mind, he's praying. Imagine this, he's in the mount, or he's in the garden, in case you have it, and he's praying, and he looks to his left, he sees the disciples sleeping, and he looks to his right, and he probably sees the exit. And he says, let this cup pass, Lord. Please take it away. I don't want this to happen this way. But if it is your will, then it is your will. What is he doing? He's looking at you and me in our unfaithfulness. He's looking at you and me in our lack of integrity. And he's saying, I will have integrity for you. I'm not a William Wallace. I'm much greater than that. If you want to, Jonathan Edwards, the great preacher, is always good for a bold, dramatic recounting of this. If you ever want drama, gloom and doom, read Jonathan Edwards' sermons. They're great. But Jonathan Edwards looks at the situation of Jesus praying. And he says this about Jesus. And the quote is rather long, but it's in your bulletin. He says, when the dreadful cup was before him, he did not say within himself, why should I, who am so great and glorious a person, infinitely more honorable than all the angels of heaven, why should I go to plunge myself into such dreadful, amazing torments for worthless, wretched worms that cannot be profitable to God or me and deserve to be hated by me and not be loved? Why should I, who have been living from all eternity in the enjoyment of the Father's love, go to cast myself into such a furnace for them that never can requite me for it? Why should I yield myself to be thus crushed by the weight of divine wrath? For them who have no love to me and are my enemies, they do not deserve any union with me, and they never did and never will do anything to recommend themselves to me. Jonathan Edwards is saying this. Jesus could have said, why? Why should I do this for people who are going to fall asleep on me? Why should I? And yet he did. He did. Now, to the degree that you and I make that a meditation in our hearts, we have to do it every day. It's not just a Sunday morning thing. It's an everyday reality to wake up and to say this. Jesus had every chance to give it all up, and he didn't because he loved me. That's a personal reality. It'll do much more for you than any movie will ever do for you, in inspiring you to change, in inspiring you to have this unwavering integrity, because you see that it was Jesus first who had unwavering integrity for you and for me. And I know I'm running out of time. I'll wrap this up. Every week that you guys come here, every week that I give a sermon, I always try to end talking about this thing called the gospel. And basically what it's saying is this: you have nothing to bring to God, but he still loves you because of what his son brought to you. And I preach this over and over, and I know it can get to be like a formula. 1 + 1 = 2. I get it. God loved me. He sent his son. Here's the thing. If the gospel is a formula for you, when suffering comes into your life, you'll lose the integrity because it was just a formula. It was never a reality. But if it's a reality in times of suffering, when God's face, like the master in the story, seems so far away, and you seem like you're at your wit's end with your last 3 months of salary, it's then that you'll be able to say, you remember what Jesus did for me? He wept. He had anguish. And he did it for me. I've been reading a book to close from Michael Redhill, a Canadian author, short stories, and one of them involves a divorced couple, Tom and Lillian. And they were college sweethearts. And they got married very young, and then they were married for quite a while. They got divorced because Lillian, the wife, did not want to have children. Or Tom, rather, sorry, did not want to have children. Lillian did, and ultimately they couldn't reconcile that and they get divorced. Now, the short story takes place after their divorce. And Tom is still sort of in love with Lillian. But he doesn't know how to repair their relationship. And he does something interesting. Even though they're divorced, and they've been divorced for years now, every year when he's making a business trip through her town, he spends one night with her and has dinner. And she has him over and they have dinner together. And there comes a point in the story where she's basically asking him, why do you keep doing this? And it's because he says, I never see you. You're so far away. And yet he has a love in his life for her. And he says, I do this to remember the familiar, he says. To remember the familiar. And he says to himself that their love, the reason why he goes back to her over and over again every year is because their love, it was more than a memory but less than a presence, he says. But a tune they could still hum. See, what he's saying is, though, Lillian, you are so far away from me, though we had this love, and though we've divorced, and though you're not in my life, I still have love for you, and I choose to hum this tune. When God seems so far away from us, we have a tune that we can hum. We can remember the familiar. We can remember what Jesus did for us in the garden, to the cross, and what we're going to celebrate in a couple weeks when he rose. He says, you want integrity? Do you want to be faithful? Look to me, because I was the one who was faithful first. For you. That's what I think of you. Hum that tune. The tune of the gospel. Please pray with me. Lord, we thank you for giving us a roadmap of character. And we ask that we can work to develop that character. I pray, Lord, that each of us can be more compassionate people, more honest people, more humble people, more generous people, people of greater and greater integrity and unwavering faith. Why? Because you lived that, Lord. You did it for us. Help us for that to be our motivation, not just our model. Help us for that to be our personal reality, not just an abstract inspiration. We ask, Lord, that by and through the gospel, you will remind us we bring nothing of recommend to you. We bring nothing of worth to you. Yet, you find us worthy because of your Son. That will heal our brokenness, Lord, and we thank you so much for that. That will make a people of integrity. We thank you for that as well. We ask that you will let us meditate on these words as we sing in our final song to you to offer up praise. And in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.